Thank you very much for your great comments, and I very much agree that there's a lot of input here for research as well. So it's not just something we hand over to the companies and now do your stuff. So I would first open the floor to the audience now. Do we have questions? And I would ask for Franziska, who has been working a lot with me on this report as well, to have a look at whether there are questions in the Q&A.
So far there aren't any questions in the Q&A. So to the audience, feel free to put any questions that you might have or comments into the Q&A section. But maybe in the meantime, we could again discuss the importance of interdisciplinary work. Some of you have already touched upon that. Maybe one question that all the panel members could answer is what were the greatest advantages, outcomes, or insights for you from this committee? And maybe there was something that you weren't aware of, particularly beforehand.
Yeah. Does anyone else want to take on this question? Otherwise, I could start. I mean, I think the autonomous driving ethics is a very interesting sector because there is such a huge discussion about both the technology side as well as the ethics side. But these two discussions are not necessarily the same ones or mingle at all, as David just said. There is this huge debate, not just debate, but it's really like a movement, the moral machine, and with all its publicity on YouTube, and it's amazing what and I think it's good that it's there to generate this discussion. But on the other hand, it's very remote from what engineers do in that field and what programmers do in that field. Maybe just to add one more comment, since just this week here at the IAI we had Iyad Rahwan, formerly from MIT and now in Berlin at the Max Planck Institute here for a speaker series talk, virtual speaker series talk, and he actually and he was, for those who don't know him, he was one of the people behind the moral machine experiments or simulations. Polls, I would rather say, and he actually had to some extent shifted his focus from just looking at these extreme dilemma situations to, well, this is something that we need to focus on in everyday risk management of cars. And he was also now saying, well, we should have a look at what distance do cars keep to each other and so on, so much more day-to-day base. So I think this is a good way where this is going. So from these very separate discussions to a joint discussion, and I think that is something that we had to a great extent in this committee as well. Does anyone else want to comment on that?
I could just jump in and say, I think one of the other things that I was I think was really struck by is that there can be a tendency to focus, when you have something as large as autonomous vehicles, to really focus in on this issue or that issue when you're doing research or trying to write a white paper. I imagine if you're trying to write policy. So for example, a lot of my work has been on trust, but focused very narrowly on issues of trust and what does it take to build trust and how do we understand notions of trust. And one of the things that I think was striking about this committee's work is how much we kept finding, and this may sound kind of obvious, but we kept finding that you can't actually think about any of these issues in isolation from any of the others. That the transparency would touch on the privacy, would touch on the cybersecurity, would touch on the explanation, would touch on the bias and non-discrimination. And so part of the challenge, I think, was on the one hand, for it to be cognitively manageable, we had to break it down into smaller pieces, but then trying to put those pieces back together in ways that, we didn't want to make recommendations that directly contradicted one another. And I think that was a real challenge to be able to do, was to ensure that our recommendations could all potentially be mutually satisfied, that we weren't advocating for one kind of solution and then saying, but don't do that solution in a different recommendation. And so I think that was one of the things that really jumped out at me, is the difficulty of putting the pieces back together after you break them down to take a narrow focus.
Yeah. Anyone
So
else? Yeah.
There's actually now one question from the audience, which states that, or asks whether we feel that in this report there are some suggestions that are broadly or easily transferable to other fields of fully autonomous AI.
Or of robotics, for example. Is that Aisha, is that a question maybe to you? How do you feel this is translatable to other fields?
Oh yes, the report that we have has some elements which can be generalized to other fields as well. I mean, when we talk about autonomous vehicles, these are a subcategory of robotics, right? These are self-automated, self-managing entities. So many elements of the report can be transferred or reused for the generalized robotics area as well.
Yeah. And anyone else? Otherwise, I mean, I would also add that many of the questions which focus on, for example, accountability and liability. I mean, these are, I would say, almost straightforwardly should be translated to other areas. I mean, when it comes to AI systems, many companies who are not specifically working on AVs want to have more clarity on what does liability mean for them, what systems do they have to put in place to work on the accountability side of their products. So yeah, I think this is really immediately transferable. And I mean, also many of the aspects of which focusing on sustainability, as well as also fairness and avoidance of biases. This is also something I believe that can be seen in other, or will be seen in other sectors as well.
I do think one I won't say limitation, but one important restriction that I think we found was that we are dealing with, in the case of autonomous vehicles, we are dealing with physical objects and actual embodied AI. And so I think there are a lot of issues that arise, but also a lot of assumptions you can make. We aren't going to suddenly have 1 billion autonomous vehicles on the road tomorrow, but we could easily have 1 billion financial trading bots in a market tomorrow. And I think that sort of scale actually in some ways can work to the benefit of developing more ethical autonomous vehicles and having them rolled out in a better way, because as was noted in the presentation, a lot of this is going to happen in a slow, step-by-step manner. And so I think we actually, in some ways, the situation is a little bit easier because it's harder to build these autonomous vehicles. And so I think we have a bit more time, not a lot, but a bit more time to do that. And I think that's probably going to be true of a lot of the sort of large object AIs and and so in that sense, for a lot of robotics.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid point. So the scalability of these products or goods, so you can copy and paste an AV. Okay. If there are no other comments on this, we have another question by our colleague Raja Chatila. from Paris, who is asking, in your opinion, will automated driving be mainly a push for more personal vehicles or for collective transportation? And I think this is of course a very fundamental question. Who wants to have a take on that?
I can take on that. Yeah, thank you. Well, I think this the automotive driving is very much driven by industry in a way. So it's research and development, innovation, and I think there is like a very business perspective on this. So there are companies are going specifically for private cars, and other ones are going to thinking of about like a service, like a fleet service. But that's why I think it's important, like, to communicate policymakers, regulators with industry in this sphere. So I think that it's a role of policymakers to really foster one side or the other, to make sure that the whole transportation system remains efficient and really solve the necessities of citizens of traveling. So I think here it's important that that autonomous vehicles are really integrated into the existing transport systems and are not like seen as a competitor. So they are going to start like creating like huge traffic issues and effects that we really wanted to avoid. So so industry lead that communication with policymakers and try to make the system more efficient.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else?
I would like to make a comment as well. First of all, Raja, I hope you're doing well. We really miss you. Wonderful session this morning, by the way, about the healthcare committee. So to answer your question, it would be a hybrid situation, and by choice. So it could be personal vehicles, autonomous vehicles that are very personalized to an individual needs or a family needs, and it could also be from the collective transportation where we talk about the smart mobility that I just mentioned in one of my slides, where we have concepts like the swarm wisdom, and research has been done in that area. So we cannot categorize as if it would be this way or that way. It probably would be a hybrid where by suitability needs or by choice, it can be an option. This would be my answer.
Yeah. Anyone else? I mean, for me, I think it depends a lot. I mean, I get asked this question a lot as well, and we see very different approaches coming from different starting points. We see these automated buses, for example, which I think are a good example, and which have improved more than people thought at first over time. And I think there we will see a lot of more introductions soon. On the other hand, we have these rather working on the personalized vehicle side. We see, of course, the more higher and higher automated driving functions. At least, well, judging for Germany, I would believe that the personal vehicles will be the first ones. I mean, I think it will be a push for more personal vehicles, at least for here. And I don't. It might be different in other places, but that's my guess. As I see it, the car companies have more interest in working on those. It might be different in other places. But that's maybe it's speculation. Not sure if someone has an opinion on that, David.
Well, I mean, I was going to say first, I think Aisha is absolutely right that one of the things that a lot of people are looking at is the ways in which autonomous vehicles, especially if they are not owned by me personally, might enable hybrid or other arrangements that sort of blur the line between collective transportation and personal vehicles. If I can call a van at any point that has an optimized route, so I go 30 seconds out of my way on my trip, well, it's not mass transit, because I'm not getting on a large bus. On the other hand, it's not a personal vehicle, especially because I might be doing a lot of ride sharing with other people. That certainly is one of the goals of at least some of the companies developing here in Pittsburgh, is to have fleets of these things that can, in relatively optimized ways, have people share for parts of their journey the vehicle. So you get many of the benefits of the personal, you can get there quickly and when you want, while also getting some of the collective benefits. But I also think it's important that I think this is one of these questions that people sometimes ask, and I'm not saying this is what Roger was asking, but are sometimes asked with this sort of idea that there's some outside force that is going to be pushing these things in one way or another. And I think as Ida pointed out, there's a lot that can be done by policy and by regulation and by political pressure and activism if people think that one of these routes is better than the other one. And I think that, you know, this is a case where industry is leading, but industry will also follow paths that are easier to follow if that's what policymakers set up. And so I think this is a case where there could be a lot of leadership potentially, perhaps collaboratively between industry and government, to try to identify which routes make the most sense for everybody, and getting things to flow in that direction.
Yeah, I agree with that. Thank you. Do we have more questions, Franziska?
So maybe what an interesting question would be, as we are from different regions or parts of the world, is what are particular barriers or maybe necessary legislation updates that you see in your particular region?
Mm-hmm. Anyone want to answer that?
I mean, I'll just say I think a pretty easy one there is the complete, basically, lack of regulation and uniformity here in the United States is a tremendous barrier in some ways. It's a tremendous advantage because companies can test kind of anywhere. There's limited regulation in a few municipalities, including the state of California. But for example, here in the city of Pittsburgh, there is literally no regulation on autonomous vehicles beyond the idea that there has to be a licensed driver sitting in the seat of the vehicle. That's the only requirement that's placed on them. So that's an advantage from the industry perspective because they can test things more quickly. But it also means that the developers don't really know what they're aiming for. They don't know what constraints they're going to need to be able to satisfy. And there's no idea whether, if they can get the vehicles to work well here in Pittsburgh, will they be able to then use them in other cities in the United States, let alone globally, where we see a tremendous amount of diversity in the approaches and the regulations. So I think that that's actually a very significant barrier to the speed of innovation, because industries don't necessarily know what they're going to have to be able to demonstrate for their vehicles in order to get them approved in different jurisdictions.
May I have a question about that, because there's a lot of talk now in European or German magazines about this, since well, of course we heard about and just maybe correct me, but it's so autonomous vehicles, I mean, test driving autonomous vehicles without a driver sitting in the seat, in the front seat, is now possible. Is that correct?
So to the best of my knowledge, in the United States, the one place where that is permitted is in California, but you have to have a licensed driver who can assume remote operations of the vehicle at all times. So you can't test on, to my knowledge, there's nowhere in the US that you can test on public roads without having someone able to some human able to take control of the vehicle. California does allow you to do it if there's not, as long as it's remote. Pennsylvania, where I live, requires a licensed driver in the front seat at all times. You can't do remote operations. So that's part of the heterogeneity that we have, and it's certainly here in the United States, I know it's a frustration for many of the people on the development side that they just don't know how to handle that. I don't know things as well in Europe.
Thank you. I can talk about my experience in this in Spain so far. We are now working in a law of mobility that is going to include a part of autonomous vehicles. So we are trying to figure out what should we include at this point. As I was saying before, the testing part, at least in Spain, is already solved. So it's not regulated in a law. It's regulated at a lower level. So it, like we call it an instruction, it's kind of like a regulation that that the minister can release. So that means that it's very easily adaptable. So that's something that I think is very useful, right? So in a regulation that necessarily has to adapt to the development of a regulation of a technology, I think having this ability to change the law and adapt it like fast, I think is very important. So for the testing part, we have that, and it's working pretty well. So we are now working to allow tests on public roads with a low speed limit, and also like looking forward to allow remote control of the vehicle. That's a testing part. Now for the law part, the challenge here that we are finding is that this topic affects many different ministries. So it's a very organizational part, but it's really fundamental. So we have to talk to the Department of Justice, Department of Technologies, Transportation, Interior, Economy, Industry. There's so many people on board, and we found that it's very important to just like create a group and it's like establish and start talking about this issue and like sharing perspectives, which are very different. And the automotive sector, it's something very regulated at United Nations part, at EU. There is a lot of safety regulations. It's very complex and very technical. But as we were trying to present in the report and our thoughts, is like we have to go farther and that security and safety part, and we have to think broader about to integrate in other aspects. So we are in that process, and at the EU, at least I think we feel constrained because we don't know how much regulation should be national, because we are expecting regulation at EU level and then at United Nations level. So you're trying to really create like a framework, like a clear framework for industry to develop this technology. But at the same time, you really don't know which step you should do. You should weigh this one. Are you going to do a regulation that is going to be contrary to what is going to happen? You know, so so there are many actors involved and at many different levels. I think that the broader, the better. So the broader I see the broader referring to geographical scope. So the higher we go, the better. But that takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
I would like to add an example here. In the UK, Ocado is a online retailer, like a supermarket. They started a few years ago in 2017, driverless delivery vans that were developed by a company called Oxbotica, and they did some trials which were quite successful, and that these trials are also being conducted in the southeast London, in the area of Woolwich, and there has been successful so far. I mean, the van could deliver groceries, you know, milk and other stuff. So yeah, I mean, there's still trials and experiments, but we can't say it's a long way or a short way to have you know, to have these in a more usual, common public. You know, everyone can do that.
Yeah, from what I heard recently is that a company in somewhere in the US is working on these autonomous snow plows. Yeah, you're nodding, which is quite, I think it's quite an interesting field. Do you know more about this, David?
I mean, in some ways it's building off of a lot of the efforts originally, as I understand it, originally with mining equipment, largely in Australia, of autonomous trucks to transport ore. And the idea is that in a lot of areas, you have long stretches of roads here in the United States that need to be kept clear of snow in the winter. You don't necessarily have the people around to do it. And it is viewed as, in some sense, a relatively low risk. You know, if something goes wrong, it drives off the road into a ditch, but oh well. I mean, in some sense, these are not intended for urban environments. And I think that that's one of the things I'll say that was also, was a bit of an, I think, and occasionally it came up in our committee work, is that it is the case that I think a lot of the attention for autonomous vehicle regulation, ethics, development is focused on the urban environment, which makes a lot of sense. But certainly here in the United States, these technologies have potential to provide enormous benefits outside of urban environments as well. When you have very large stretches where there aren't very many people, you could potentially deploy them very quickly and have them be able to do transport, be able to do things like plowing snow and these sorts of efforts. So I think that's maybe a next frontier for a lot of these things is thinking about how to translate or ensure that what's being developed also works outside of urban environments. So works on dirt roads or roads that are perhaps not well marked, or don't have all of the advantages that you have in an urban environment.
Yeah, and I think it also connects very nicely to the general framework on AI governance that the EU is now developing, and we will see what kind of really governance or regulation we will see there soon. But one key point is there the differentiation between different levels of risk, and yeah, one of the purposes is to identify areas with low risk and to separate them from the others, which I think makes a lot of sense. And so there is not a one size fits all when it comes to AI regulation. I mean, this is much too broad. I would totally agree. And so even within the field of automotive or autonomous driving, there are even very different tasks or as you say, use cases which might have really very low risk, like driving through North Dakota and freeing the roads from snow. I remember some years ago when I was doing consulting for autonomous driving for the Canadian Transport Authority, I think it's called, and they were very interested in having these trucks on the roads, which would cover very long distances, but where there's really very, very little traffic. And again here, the risk is comparably low to when it comes to urban environments. That's something that in a country like Germany, which is quite densely populated all over, or take the Netherlands or others, or Tokyo area, of course, and Bay Area. And so this is quite different. I think we will not see a one size fits all there.
Yeah, I think in the United States, I think, well, there are a lot of complications, but long haul trucking is an obvious use where there are large parts of the United States that right now autonomous vehicles are probably safer than the human drivers, because you're dealing with environments that are, typically straight, well marked, not a lot of traffic, and the big risk is driver fatigue and inability to maintain sustained vigilance and attention. And so, I think that there's a lot of potential there right now, but there are challenges in other respects to implementing long-haul trucking in the US.
Indiana would be one example, right? Driving through Indiana?
I was thinking more Kansas, Oklahoma, Wyoming, the middle part of the United States where, it can easily take 12 to 16 hours to drive, where you'll see almost no other vehicles. I mean, I know that might seem a little surprising, but it really is the case. I've had to do some of these drives many times, and it really is the worry is not that you're going to hit somebody, it's that you're going to fall asleep. And autonomous capabilities could help a lot with some of that.
Right. Yeah. That brings me to another point, because of course you can easily fall asleep when you drive at 55 miles per hour, but for the German Autobahn, it might be possible, but I think to a lesser extent. And so, but there's again the question: do we need to have a speed limit where we still don't have a general speed limit? And I think I've seen some figures. I think around 60 or 70% of German Autobahn is still without speed limits. So will that need to change when we introduce higher levels of autonomous cars to a significant extent? I mean, that might be a German problem, but what do the others think?
I think that the greatest challenge here is going to be the transition phase. While we have like people driving and autonomous vehicles on the road, I think that we'll have several years, or if not decades, that we are going to have this try to combine these two types of vehicles and driving, and that's where I see that could be like the most dangerous interaction. So maybe not adding that speed limit control, but maybe like starting with, I don't know, like like dedicated lanes or something like that. You know, like I think that not only for Germany, but thinking also in other countries, I think it could be that's something that policymakers have to start thinking ahead and try to think how we're going to integrate future vehicles into the existing traffic until we know each other, like drivers plus machines. I see that challenge there.
Just one question to that point, because that again would translate into infrastructure, and what do you need to do in terms of infrastructure? Whereas here, I mean, I'm in contact with a number of car makers, and they are saying, no, we need to solve that from our end. We need to have the cars that can cope with any type of environment, basically, and this is again, I wonder if this is kind of, how do you say, catch-22 maybe, or something like that. So where would you start? And if we, I'm just worried if we start to wait for infrastructure measures, would we get anywhere? That's my worry. Not sure how you see that.
I'm working at the OECD exactly in this topic with infrastructure and AVs, and we are approaching this problem with 4 perspectives. One is regarding physical infrastructure. Another one is digital infrastructure, data, and regulatory aspects. So the physical infrastructure is like, hey, if the cars are going to be safer, we expect that they can communicate with each other. Maybe you don't have to respect so much distance between one car and the next. They can be closer. So then the firm, you know, like the road has to have like different physical characteristics that you have to think. Or maybe you can do the lanes narrower so you can bring more cars into the highway, right? So that's what type of consideration. Other consideration are digital. So that's the point. Okay, are we gonna start like establishing antennas all over the roads to allow like kind of like Wi-Fi connections, where it's going to be more satellite, or that's a different aspect, which maybe in cities makes sense. You know, maybe where there are like where you are anticipating that it's going to be a lot of traffic, or in places that are like more riskier, then you want to make sure that you have a double check. That you have not only the connection between vehicles, or the vehicle by itself, but you have also a connection with infrastructure, etc. Then there is the data that you want to collect, and that you can offer industry, for example, like traffic management or accidents, to collaboratively share knowledge to improve the traffic in the overall system. And finally, the regulatory aspects, right? This will imply like changes in regulation in many fields. So infrastructure is like, we are working in this for broad aspects.
Yeah, great. Anyone else? Any comments on that? I mean, I believe that the infrastructure aspect is important, and I mean, but what is clear, we need 5G technology before we can really do that on a large scale. And unfortunately, in Germany, it's still problematic, even with 4G in many areas. And so, yeah. It's much better in some countries than in others. Okay. Franziska, do we have any other questions?
So far, there are no more further questions from the audience, but maybe what we could discuss between the panel members is what are our next steps after this report. So in our report, we state that we call for the industry and policymakers to rely on our recommendations, but maybe each of you could shortly state what kind of projects you are currently working on that are related to our report.
Mm-hmm. So first of all, I think we need to see that what are the next steps for the AI4People, of course. I believe what is now at stake, I think, is to translate these guidelines that we have into work for companies, work for civil society organizations, but also for research. And as David rightly pointed out, and I think, for example, here at the IAI, we have a project, a significant project, which has been running now for around a year, the UNRE project. Do you want to say something about this project, maybe?
Yes, sure. I can talk about that project. So basically, it's called UNDRE, standing for Autonomous Driving Ethics. It's an interdisciplinary project between the Institute of Automotive Technology here at TUM and the Chair of Business Ethics of Professor Lüttke. And I'm working there with another doctoral student on it. And we also, as was previously discussed, saw that most of the discussion around in autonomous driving ethics was about the trolley problem and how to basically go on or solve these issues when or how autonomous vehicles should behave in unavoidable accident situations. And we went into the literature and saw that there are many arguments from philosophy, law, but also engineers that now state that focusing on these dilemma situations is just not sufficient anymore aspiring to truly develop or implement autonomous vehicles in the future. So what we are therefore doing in this project at the moment was, first of all, we went into the literature and looked at different traditional ethical theories and wanted to find out how can we apply these and integrate them into code. And we developed some advantages and disadvantages for both, and also came up with a few, or not came up, but found or identified a few distribution principles that could help in the distribution of risks. And therefore, we saw that we don't want to focus anymore on these life or death decisions, but rather on the distribution of risks, not in critical dilemma situations, but in general in mundane traffic situations. And our research question in this project is mainly how can we include a fair distribution of risk in the trajectory planning of automated vehicles. And to do that, on the technical side, we will develop a motion planning framework that considers both the distribution of risks, but also the calculation of risks. And then on the ethical part, which will be my part mainly, or is my part, we will try to find out what is actually a fair or what could be a mandatory distribution of responsible risk. And also what we would like to do is investigate how would individuals distribute risks in traffic scenarios. And to do that, we will conduct an experiment in the coming year to investigate maybe what are the distribution preferences and also what are potential thresholds of acceptable risks. And this will follow in the next 2 years. We will finalize the project in the end of 2022, hopefully with a lot of results that can help practice to develop a moral vehicle in the end.
Thank you very much. Yeah, great conclusion. Does anyone else want to have a go at that?
I just want to say that, Francesca, that sounds super interesting. I think that defining thresholds is very hard. So yeah, so for autonomous vehicles, when is safe enough to put it on the road, right? That's a challenge that policymakers are facing a lot. So I really look forward to those results, really. So yeah, congratulations. It sounds a very exciting project.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I'll just toss out, I mean, there's a lot of things going on, but specifically with AVs, one of the ongoing projects is about the nature of explanation and explainable AI, which connects with a lot of the themes of transparency and other things that came up in the report. Because, there I think is it is a lot of the research on explainable AI, I'll put it this way, focuses on basically what are the features of the ones and zeros, the features of the technology that it must have to be explainable. But one of the things we've developed, both in terms of a theory of this, but also experimental evidence for it, is that actually what counts as a good explanation depends quite a lot on what you're trying to do with the technology. So the explanation for a driver will not be the same as the explanation for a regulator, will not be the same as an explanation for a pedestrian outside of the vehicle. And so one of the things that we're starting to try to think about that will undoubtedly be guided by this report is how do you translate that research finding into something that is policy or practice specific? Because who should the car be able to explain itself to? Is it everybody? Is it only some people? Is it depend on the conditions? What does that actually look like? We know at this point, we think we've got very good evidence that people want different kinds of explanation depending on their role of interaction with the vehicle. But translating that into, okay, what does it actually look like in a vehicle is an entirely different set of research challenges. And so that's going to be one of the real interests over the next few years that will undoubtedly be shaped by this report.
Thank you. Thank you. I believe that we have a lot of questions on our agenda and a lot of topics now that we can work on. This explainability aspect is one which is a huge one in itself. And it's, again, I think it can only be dealt with in an interdisciplinary way. So yeah, we will have to work together with the people, the programmers and the ethicists or lawyers. And I think only in that way can we solve it. Great.
Yeah, Christoph, thank you. I just I totally agree with that. It's super interesting, the explanation. Yes. To whom are you going to give the explanation and how are you going to give it? People may be interested on different things, of course. So I really see that that's something that there is a lot of work that has to be done there. Another point that I was thinking is the human-machine interaction. I've been reading about articles of how people are developing like external interfaces, like in the car. So not only thinking of the driver, but also thinking of people outside the vehicle, right? So starting to put like screens or something so that pedestrians can see that the autonomous vehicle has seen them so they can cross safely the street, etc. So making the vehicles friendlier. So at the end of the day, it is translating to trust and acceptance, of these cars into society. So I think that's this part of creativity. How can we make the machine more more human in a way. I think that's that touches like also philosophical themes. I found that very interesting, and also not only from the external part, but of course from the person who is in the car. There's also a lot of saying like with these vehicles that are level 3, especially level 3, how is going to be the transition when the machine wants to give back the control to humans. So we had a lot of discussions on the timings and how should that transition be, or should that load be put into the driver, or should the machine be able to get into this minimum risk maneuver, etc. Right. So this human-machine interaction, and coming back to my previous point of transitioning between traditional cars and autonomous vehicles car, I think it's also going to be a lot of work there to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you very much. Since we have no further questions, Aisha, do you also want to have some final words? I would say, and then we might also close a little earlier.
Yeah, I was thinking about the aspect of accountability, and you know that well. An interesting project about how could we enable accountability within the autonomous vehicles, and a key element of that is empathetic learning. So what about the empathy and how the AIs or the different autonomous systems could understand each other? How could we, as the human agency, could investigate into, and that relates to the point of explainability, to relate into the decisions that are made by these autonomous systems, and what was the rationale behind making these decisions? I think that could be a very interesting aspect to explore.
Yes, absolutely. And that would be very fascinating to explore that in a joint project, and hopefully we will also see others coming out of this report, which I'm certain we will see. If there are no other statements that the others would like to make, I think we have covered pretty much of it. I would just like to say we will so this report is now on the website of AI4People and can be found there, but we will also publish it as an article in the International Journal of Technoethics, where it will be published, I think, Franziska, in the January issue, January 21 issue of International Journal of Technoethics. Yeah, I encourage you to distribute it widely there. So I would like to say finally a big thank you to all the committee members, those who are here and those who are not here, because this has been certainly quite a new experience for us all, working together in this from the beginning and in this virtual environment. And I remember the first meeting which we held for our US partners in the middle of the night because we could not shift the daytime anymore. And yeah, so I appreciate it very much from all of you to have taken your time working jointly on this project. And I think we can be really happy and satisfied with this result. And now let's see that we widely distribute it, share it, and reap more fruits of this project. Yeah, with this being said, I would like to close this session. And again, thanks also to the audience for the questions. Thanks, Franziska, for working a lot and doing much of the main work on this report, actually, I should say. And without you, it would not have been possible. Thanks to the discussants, and yeah, hope to see you soon, also physically, hopefully, maybe at our Responsible AI Forum next year or some other places. So thank you very much. And
thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well
thank
done.
you, Gustav.
So handing over to AI4People now.